Hello, everyone, and thanks for attending today's webinar presentation featuring the Biscom Enterprise Fax Management Demo Deep Dive. I want to thank everyone for joining. For those who may have joined us 2 weeks ago, today's presentation is a continuation of our original webinar, Replacing Your Legacy Fax Server. It's easier than you think. For those who were able to attend that webinar, you may have noticed that towards the end of the presentation, we ran short on time and had to cut the demonstration portion a little bit short. So today's agenda is actually going to be all demo focused, and we're going to be taking a deep dive look at the Biscom Enterprise Fax Management console and interface and spending a lot more time looking at the exact product. Today's panelists include myself, David Angelitis, the Director of Sales from Instant Info Systems, and I am joined today by my colleague, Gus Agadello, a Senior Development Engineer from Biscom, who was instrumental in the development and creation of the Enterprise Fax Management Console, and he will be giving us the tour today. Just one quick housekeeping item for the audience. If you're familiar with the GoToWebinar meeting interface, if you want to check the control panel, there is a Q&A tab where you will be able to ask questions. During today's presentation, I am going to do my best to answer those questions in real time and make this a little more interactive with the group. So if you have something while we're going through that you see Gus explaining or showing on the screen and have a question that you'd like us to address, I am going to do my best in real time to answer those and maybe have Gus explain or elaborate as we go through. So feel free to submit those questions throughout the presentation. And then, of course, if we run out of time, we will have someone reach out to make sure that we get all of the questions answered that are asked. So without further ado, what I would like to do is turn this over and dive right into the demo to Gus Agadello to show us the Enterprise Fax Management Console.
Okay, thank you, David. Let me just get my screen shown, and let me know when you can see that screen so I can continue.
I've got it up on my side.
Okay, good. So we're gonna talk about the Enterprise Fax Management from Biscom, mostly in the context of a migration. After migrating whatever products our customer may have that was handling fax before, what it would look like managing the new system with a Biscom product. And before I go in and start talking about the screens exactly, like the screen that you're seeing right here, I just want to mention one aspect about how the Biscom product is architected that's kind of important to know, so that a lot of what I show will make sense. And that is that the Biscom product is divided into two major components, a fax server component and a FAXCOM queue component. And the FAXCOM servers component do all the faxing. They connect to all the phone lines. They connect to the call centers, whether you do that fax over IP or straight to a telephone line system. And they don't need to know anything about how the faxing is integrated into an environment. All they do is send faxes. And then the FAXCOM
So does that piece may be analogous for our audience if they have another platform, the physical Brook Trout board or the remote dock transport, but essentially it's all of the sending and receiving of the phone calls.
That is correct, yes. And then the other piece is the FAXCOM queue that handles all the integration into the environment. And the way the Biscom product is architected is that you can create a sort of like a pool of FAXCOM servers that are independent of any application that's being service faxing to. And then you can create queues to actually integrate with those applications that will then connect and leverage that pool of faxing on the fax servers. And there's a lot of independence and isolation between those systems. So you could have 4 different applications running on what we call our 4 FAXCOM queues, all sharing whatever pool of fax boards that were being installed on the fax servers. And new applications could be added and removed that would be completely isolated and independent from the queues that are already existing, that would then continue to share those boards. So the architecture allows you to have a lot of benefits in the efficiency of being able to pool all the fax hardware into a couple of locations, and to be managed independently of the software that actually integrates with the different applications that are being serviced to fax procedures. And I just wanted to start with that because as I start showing the enterprise fax management, you'll see how that plays out and how the system is managed.
So guys, I think, and I've had other customers do this, if the audience wants to think of the fax queues as either a unique set of users, a specific department, or maybe a specific integration, it's essentially a tool to separate different groups and apply different rules and policies to them, and then simplify that from a central interface.
Exactly. And every queue is isolated from the next, so you can do whatever changes, or you can have different people managing one system as opposed to another, and they can do whatever changes are important and specific to that environment, completely independent or affecting anything else, any other environment in the enterprise, which gives this a lot of benefits and leverage to the way that works. And this demo that I'm going to do is going to show how that all plays out, particularly with this enterprise fax management. What I've done is I've created an example enterprise that has migrated over to Biscom. And I'm going to say that this enterprise was a result of two companies that migrated together, that merged together, a company called Corp and a company called EngLab. And I'm going to say that that particular enterprise had three applications that they needed to service. They had a mail to fax application for their Corp side of their company. They had some PO fulfillment applications that they needed to fulfill. And they also had a mail to fax for the EngLab side of their corporation. And then I'm also going to say that they installed fax servers, the actual physical fax boards and the fax lines in two different data centers to handle all the faxing for all those applications. And if you look at the screen that we're showing right now, you'll see that this is the enterprise fax management, and it actually, we have sort of like the categories, which is basically what I've just described. We have a category which is all the Corp fax systems. So in this particular enterprise, they have applications that are related to the Corp side of their business. And if I was to click on this, which I'll do eventually, it would show all the systems that are associated with that part of the enterprise. Again, the EngLab part of the enterprise would be this next selection here. And then I even went further to show that on a per application basis, we also created entries. So we have here a place where we can manage the fax queues that were created just to handle the mail aspects of the Corp side of the company. And then we have also here an entry to manage the fax queues that were handling the PO fulfillment applications for the Corp side of the company. And then also, et cetera, we have the view that will give us manage the fax queues that are handling the mail to fax for the EngLab Corporation. And then we have views that show us the fax servers installed to different data centers. And obviously,
Gus, I think,
yes, go ahead.
Gus, I was going to say, I think you're going to show this a little bit later, but I know some customers have asked this before. This view is you as the master administrator, so you're seeing everything, but you can actually customize these views. So if you wanted someone that was on the Corp side of the business or the EngLab side, they could only see the EngLab tab, and they may only see Data Center West, but this can be fully customized so that different groups or business owners within your enterprise could still have a view or a portion of this, but without seeing all of the components.
Absolutely, yes. So this is, as you can see, it's a web browser. So I'm accessing this through a browser, which means it's universal accessible throughout the enterprise. And there is a way, and I will get to that as I continue the demo, a way to add users or administrators to be able to manage certain aspects, select which of these entries they can have access to view or to manage. And there's different levels of access that there is. There's a view-only level, and there's also like a manage level where you can make changes. What we call these, in the enterprise fax management, we actually call them consoles. So what you're looking at here is a list of about 9 consoles. And each console has been customized to represent a particular aspect of my complete fax environment. So again, we have a console that can show me all the systems that are for Corp, or also a console that is specifically for the applications that handle the mail to fax for Corp. And if you were migrating from, an old installation that was perhaps handled by multiple vendors or maybe the same vendor, but there were different installations within your enterprise. You may have to, in that scenario, you may have to remote desktop to load applications to manage that aspect of your fax product. So you may have had to remote desktop to one computer to manage the applications that are handling the mail to fax, and then maybe remote desktop to a different computer to handle, the fax processes that are handling the PO fulfillment center. But now with the enterprise fax management, you're going to be able to see all those applications on a single browser screen. And not only can I see them all as being perhaps what I would consider myself as a system administrator, I can also share out some of these consoles to other administrators to view a um, selection of these consoles. So if I had some administrators that were only interested in the PO fulfillment centers, I could share out that aspect, that one console, and they would launch the browser. They would go to the website, and they would only see that one console. And I can do that right now because I have another browser here running as a different user. Here I have this one running as myself, Gus Agadello. And if I bring up this one over here, and this was actually running on Firefox, this is running on this Edge service account. As you can see, this particular administrator is only seeing the fax queues for Core PO Fulfillments console. Now, I'll be clicking on these consoles in a second. I just want to talk a little bit more about this page because there's a lot more about it that makes it important and interesting. The first thing is that in this one page, I've given myself a good blueprint of how I've installed distributed fax components, a fax software across my enterprise. I have one page where it gives me a blueprint of all the systems and all the applications that I'm handling. But also, as you've already seen, every console can be configured with its own set of alarms. So as you can see, I have two consoles with alarms here as well. So not only am I seeing my blueprint of all my installations, but I'm actually seeing which areas of my fax installation is having problems. And I'm seeing this all on one screen. So this is a big advantage from having multiple separate and completely separate systems where you would have to go to different locations to monitor their performance, to being able to see it in one place. So right here, I can see that my fax queues for corp emails has got an alarm, and I can see that my fax servers at Data Center East has got an alarm. And first thing I'll show you is that you can actually click on the alarms to see what they are here. And for instance, in this corp for email, I have a process called this SMTP fax queue, which has got 8 undeliverable emails. So it's telling me it's having problems delivering me email, and there's 8 emails that haven't been able to deliver it. And then over here on my FastCom server, the Data Center East, it's telling me this FastCom 4 is not reporting, so it's not running, most likely. Not reporting means it's either not running or it just can't be reachable through the network. And you can click on these alarms to get more information on them. All right, so we try to give you intelligence or more information as to how to try to debug this issue. So we'll give you as much information as we can think of here. But you also have a graph that can give you an idea of how long this has been going on for. I'm not sure if you can see this blue line at the top, there's 8 undeliverable emails. If you go back, you'll see that this has actually been in this state since April. So these graphs are real-time graphs that give you an indication of the state of the system. If you go back here, they go up to about 6 months, and we can see that we were fine up until about sometime in January. So this type of information can be very important because it can show you if you are starting to get problems occasionally, you can see that, hey, this started happening in January. What might have changed in January that could be causing these problems? So this information could be very helpful in trying to find out what's the cause of particularly those problems that occur occasionally and maybe hard to find. One of the things about these alarms, too, is that they're not necessarily just checking the Biscom software, but they're checking all the software that Biscom interacts with. So this particular alarm could be something that's related with the mail servers that the queue is communicating to and causing it to not be able to deliver emails. It could be related to maybe DNS entries that are redirecting the connections, etc. So that's something to keep in mind. And down here in the FastCom's not reporting, we see that we've had no FastCom not reporting. Again, I'll just go back and you'll see that this about mid-April, this fax server stopped reporting. And again, we include in there all these alarms information as to where to begin to start looking why this might be an issue. This information has been from our experience with a support crew helping our customers, determining what some of the usual causes are of some of these problems, and we try to put some of that intelligence here. And again, emails would also be sent. The other thing I would mention about alarms is that we do have 4 types of alarms. We have failure alarms, alarms that tell you that something's failing. For instance, when the email can't be delivered, the service is not running. There's communication issues between systems. We also have performance alarms based on the performance in the system. How long is the fax taking to become active? How busy are the FastCom server fax ports? Are we 100% busy? How long is it taking to deliver or receive fax? So we have those types of alarms as well. We also have alarms based on the expected amount of traffic. If a fax queue is supposed to be sending faxes every day from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you're supposed to send at least, let's say, 100 faxes an hour. This could be alarms set saying that, the fax queues are not sending that number of faxes. Could point to an issue with an application that's not submitting faxes properly. And we also have alarms based on the quality of the phone lines. So if there's a lot of excessive error rates, you can get alarms based on that as well. And what I'm going to do next, I'm going to start going into these consoles, and you're going to see what a console looks like, and you can see graphs that show us performance, and those graphs will show you how we can make these alarms happen. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how, even though we have an alarm on the fax server data center, it's not really impacting any of our applications. All right, so we did have one alarm in this application here, but it was related to emails, not related to faxing. And there was an alarm in the fax servers. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this console. You can see what it looks like in there. The first thing that it does is it tells me there's an alarm happening in this console right here. This fax server is not reporting. If I close that alarm, you can see the view of the console. And what you see in the console is the systems that are being managed by this console, which are these two fax servers. And then you have performance graphs that tells you information about how these systems are performing. As you can see, we have graphs that tells you the percent utilization of the ports. And you can see this Giagodella Win 7, which is the blue line right here, is running around 16% of their TX ports and RX ports. And there's actually more information as well. It tells you how many pages are being sent or received per hour, and if we're getting any connection or non-connection errors, which would tell you there could be issues in the phone lines. And these are just the default.
Hey, Gus, we had a question that I think applies to this that we're looking at, where someone asked about if there was a report showing how many times we have all the channels busy. And what I was thinking here in this, what you're showing is we have two Brook Trout cards, let's say, for example, with a PRI in each, and one of them has stopped working. But because the throughput of the system can handle all of that through a single card, even though you've lost one of your trunks, what we're seeing in the graph above is that it looks like it's hovering right around the 25% on the usage. So even though that we've lost an entire board, the system's still able to handle all the traffic that's going through it.
Yes, correct. So as you can see, we're only using 25% of the boards that are available in the system. So even though there's an alarm here, and whatever administrators were tasked to make sure that these systems are running properly, they would be working at getting this Biscom 4 up and running. But everybody else in the environment wouldn't see a problem because the one fax server here that's running is handling all the traffic. And to answer the question about seeing how often you hit the top percentage, we have the history views here. So this is looking at the last 3 hours. You can go back and look at the up to a 6 months point of view. And for instance, I go back to this 3 month view, and you can see how often we are hitting that peak. You can see here now. This is at this point this other fax server was running. That's why we have two colors in the graphs here. You can go ahead and you can select a fax server just to limit. But you can see that this Biscom 4 was hitting 100% at some points. So to answer that question, there's a couple of answers to that question. One is the graphs will show you. You can go back in time and see how often this is happening. But also, as I was telling you about the alarms earlier, how we had the different categories of alarms, all of these graphs translate to possible alarms. So this would have been alarming during this time period. So this is back in March right here. And I can actually go back here and we can zone into a couple of days in March. So this is basically beginning on the 28th of March, viewing a week, and it was running around 75% and touching 100% occasionally. So there's ways to go back and see the past performance of the systems, but there's also the fact that because there are alarms, you would have been getting these alarms all along at the level that you set them. So if you wanted to set it when it went past 50%, you would see that this would be alarming pretty much all the time that week. Or if you want to set it at 75%, then you could see that you would get alarms, quite a few during the week, but it would be less than if it was at 50. I mean, at 50%, it would be an alarm state pretty much the whole week. So you think that answers the question, David, or?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know we've had other customers set this up. So, for example, particular importance is on inbound. If you reach 100% utilization, you're giving busy signals to anyone who's trying to call in. So I know a lot of times we'll have customers that will set that up so that if you're hitting the 100% and you have no ability to receive any more faxes, you can be notified when that happens. So yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, and a lot of times, usually they may even set it like around 75% because they want to make sure they have that buff. They always have that buffer. So they set it at 75%, and you could actually set two alarms. You could set an alarm at 50% and say if it's at above 50% for a straight half an hour, send me an alarm. And if it goes above 75% for 10 minutes, send me an alarm. And if it hits 100%, instantly send me an alarm. So there's actually different levels of alarms that you can set, and then you can also put time frames on it. So it doesn't have to be every time it hits 50%, instantly send me an alarm. Just send me an alarm if it stays there above 50% for more than 15 minutes. So there's a few different, ways that you can really, structure this alarming system to what would be the most beneficial for your environment.
And I think too, for the audience, we see this a lot with outbound. If you have your SAP system set up to send outbound or your ERP system, if that's sending out and you wanted to have a notification go if jobs start piling up or taking longer than a certain threshold to send out, you could have just the individual, like the SAP program manager, that would receive an alert saying faxes are now taking over 15 minutes to be delivered. And I know we've had some customers that have done that too on the heavy outbound where they're doing blasting. If they have SLAs they have to meet, they can set those thresholds so that they know if they don't have enough channels to get them out fast enough, and they can be alerted when that occurs.
That's correct. Let me go back here to the home page again for a second. And the first time I go to the home page, when you refresh, it tells you the existing alarms just to make sure that you're aware of them. But let me go back to this page. And as we were talking earlier, these are all different consoles that can be managed by different individuals. And we were showing how right now 2 of these consoles have an alarms. But I have an administrator. My example was that I have another administrator looking at this console. And I'm going to bring up that version of the browser, which only has that one console. Now you see, this particular administrator doesn't even know there's an alarm because, first of all, he's not handling this fax queues for court mail. It's not of his interest. And even though there's an alarm with the fax servers, we saw that the fax server area was able to handle the throughput anyway, so there's no cause for alarm for this particular administrator. And let me click on this console to show you what this administrator would see. So this administrator is handling the integration side of the fax product, and he's integrating with 3 sites that do PO fulfillment. So that's what these queues represent, 3 different sites of operators that are handling PO purchase orders. And then he also has graphs associated with the fax traffic based on this application. So this application will also show you how many pages are being sent and received by this graph. But it also gives you information like the size of your pending log, and if there's a backlog in your pending log, which in this case there really isn't. There was maybe for 1 minute a backlog of 1 entry for about a minute, and then went back to 0. It also shows you your delays, how long it's taken for a fax to be sent, to go active on the fax server, which again, there was a case here for 1 minute where it took 1 minute for a fax to be sent, and the RX delays, which is about 1 minute, which is within the range that we expect, because 1 minute could be anything more than 30 seconds. It gets rounded up. And it also shows you of all the faxes how many errors you're getting, and in this case it's 0, and that's because we're running in the lab environment, so it's going to be close to 0 in this case. So you can see this particular individual managing the system would have nothing to worry about. They would look at it, there's no alarms here, everything looks very clean, the performance is really healthy, and they can actually go back and look in the past. So you have views. And again, the different graphs have the different colors for different applications, different sites that you might have. Again, you can click on individual entries to filter it out. But as you can see, the backlog has never gone beyond 3 faxes, and they've been sending close to 186 pages, or receiving close to 186 and sending up to 346 pages in the last month. There was a point here where there was a delay of 70 minutes that would have triggered an alarm. There was something that was not functioning properly. And all these consoles, alarms can be configured separately, which means that every application could basically set the limits that they feel comfortable with. And it's really going to vary because some applications may be broadcast-based applications that are sending 10,000 faxes at a shot, which could mean that it might take half an hour for the last fax of that broadcast to go out. So their alarms would not be send me an alarm if the fax was delayed by 5 minutes. And then there could be an application, which is a PO fulfillment that you want to make sure gets responded within 5 minutes, in which case you would have an alarm in those applications that say, hey, if a fax doesn't get sent within 5 minutes, it's taking longer for a fax to be sent, more than 5 minutes, and send me an alarm. So all of these consoles can be configured individually for the specific performance alarms that you would need. And again, the performances can be viewed through by entering the console. Is anything else you think we should add to that, David, as far as this particular aspect of the demonstration?
No, not right now. I think it looks great.
Okay. Because that was, I think that's, as far as we're going to go, as far as the monitoring and the performance aspects, I was going to talk about one more thing, which is the configuration aspects. How much, actually, David, how much more time do we have for this demo? Was it a half-hour demo, or?
We have till the top of the hour, so we have plenty of time.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So in that case, that was about as far as I was going to go with the actually the monitoring and the alarming aspects of this. And I want to talk now a bit about the configuration aspects, how you can actually configure all these components. I was going to talk about the fact that if you have a large environment, you could have a lot of fax servers. You could have 20 or 40 fax servers. You could have 12 different applications that you're trying to fulfill for faxing, to add faxing to. And on those applications, you could have multiple queues. So you could have what we call FastCom queues. You could have 30 FastCom queues because you have that need. So the other aspect I want to talk about is how to manage so many systems, how to be able to make sure that they're all configured properly. And another reason why you would create consoles is we have what's called the concept of configuration policies. Configuration policies are ways to be able to set certain configuration items on a whole slew of components. So if you had 100, let's say, I'm going to say 100 queues, and you wanted to set a certain aspect of those 100 queues exactly the same, you can do it through a configuration policy. You can do it through one screen where you make the change, and that change will be applied to every component. So it makes the management of a system for an enterprise that may have a lot of applications a little simpler. And the way I was going to display that was when I started the demo, I talked about this example that was actually a company that had been a result of a merger of two companies, Corp and EngLab. And I'm going to go into this All Corp Fax Systems console. And I'm going to show you that in this particular theoretical company, there was a policy that said that all the applications for Corp have to go through its own dedicated fax server. And that's this Giagodella Win7. And if I go in here in FastCom queues, these are the queues that were handling the different applications for Corp. If you remember from the home page that I showed earlier, we had the mail application and the PO fulfillment application. So what I'm going to say is that we have to make sure, because of some policy or maybe a law or some, some regulation that says that all the traffic going through these queues can only use that one fax server. Now, the way the Biscom architecture is set up, you can have all your queues use all fax servers, or they can use selected subsets of fax servers. It really depends on what's the appropriate need for the enterprise. And to manage the properties of a queue, you would enter the properties, and this is what you would see. You would see the screen that has all the different properties associated with our queue, all the different features that you can enable and configure. And one of them is FastCom connections. All right, so I have 3 fax servers here, and as you can see, the only one that's enabled is a Giagodella Win7, and the other 2 are disabled. There's other things here. I'm not going to get into all the different specifics. It's very similar to what any other fax vendor would have as to different configuration specifics of a component like this. One other one I do want to show is the SMTP settings. You may have to configure to know which mail system to communicate to, and again, because of my organization, I'm saying that these queues have to communicate to the Corp mail server. Now, in this particular example, I've only got about 5 queues, right? But let's say I could have had 15 or 20. Let's say I wanted to be able to configure all those and make sure that they were following this policy. Because they're handling faxing applications for that side of my enterprise, they can only use the fax server that's associated with the fax. And And these policies can be used for other reasons. I just chose that one reason as a simple example of how policies can be used. So I went in there and I clicked on what's called the configuration policy for this console. I'll go back here, and it's over here. And what this does, it allows you to select certain subsets of those properties and say, now those properties have to be configured through here and will be configured equally in every queue in this console. So if I go in there, you can see it's pretty similar to the properties I showed you of the queue, but it's actually a smaller selection because you can select exactly how many of those you want to be able to configure en masse. There's a way to add remove fields, and basically everything in this first column maps to a full tab, and you can actually go, once you go in the tab, you can actually select specific fields. So I was able to select which fields I want to be able to manage on this policy. And as you can see here, I have this Giacodello Win7 set to true as I'm using the server, but I'm not using these other two servers. I have it set here to use this Corp mail server. I have a few other things that I might have added. For instance, the off-peak time, these restrictions of numbers, make sure nobody dials 911, et cetera, stuff like that. So I can actually set all that at this policy, and by doing that, it makes sure that all these queues follow that same information. So if I click in any of these queues, you can see that it's set that way, but you can also see that this fast connection has a 1 next to it, which tells me it's being controlled by that policy. It locks these fields, so I can't now. Nobody can go in here and change these fields specifically. It can only be done through the policy. So not only does it enforce those fields, but it not only does it set those fields in those queues, but it also locks it so nobody can make changes. And the reason I'm showing that is because if you remember, this other administrator was handling the queues that were the PO fulfillment center. And this administrator can make changes, but he won't be able to change the things that had been set through a policy at a higher level. So at a higher level, a policy was set to force these queues to only use this fax server. And now this administrator who's been given access to manage this queue can make changes to, for instance, to other things like cover pages, TSI headers, etc. But he won't be able to change these things that are being enforced at a higher level that are really beyond what that administrator would have to worry about. And not only that, but this administrator was actually able to also use policies to set the fields that they can set. So he was able to use policies to set the TSI for the faxes that are coming out through these queues, to set the retry schedules, and to set the cover pages. And if I go back in here, open up that queue, you'll see that if I go, for instance, the fax options, this 2 right here tells me on the TSI that's being set by policy. It's not editable directly in the queue, but it's editable through the policy, and this administrator does have access to that policy to make changes. So policies allow you to change lots of systems through one screen, but also allows you to enforce certain regulations, and also gives you a cascade level of inheritance where different administrators have different access to change different aspects of these systems based on what the regulations of the enterprise may be.
Hey, Gus, we had a question about the reporting. And I know in here we've seen a lot of the real-time view, but one of the questions was asked about what type of reports can be produced if we could see fax volumes or reports by users or group, sending versus receiving. Do you mind taking a minute to show some of the reporting capabilities? Do you have that on this machine?
Yeah, actually I don't have this machine because that's all part of the job tracking module. That's where the reporting would take place. So job tracking module would use to do the reports. So that hasn't been integrated into the enterprise fax management at this point, but going forward, the plan is to start integrating more of our tools directly into the enterprise management. So the reporting tool is a separate module currently, but at some point it will become embedded into the tool that I'm just demonstrating right now.
Perfect. And for the individual that asked that question, if you'd like to have some time or a demo set up to look at the job tracking application, we'd be happy to do that as well. But it is a full and very robust reporting platform to do all of what you had asked.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to show with the policy and the ability to manage multiple items to one screen, and also the ability to force certain settings. I really only had one last thing I wanted to show, David, unless you can think of something I forgot, but was to show the audit trail of these
Well, Gus,
changes.
before we go into the audit trail, I did have another question here that I think is might be relevant to everyone on. There was a question about the integration with SIP trunks and if we see higher error rates with SIP versus PSTN lines. And the short answer that we do have integrations with SIP trunks. It will work. Those are using the Dialogic SR140 software that I think a lot of fax servers utilize. However, you're exactly right that between SIP and PSTN lines, we typically do see an increase in failure rates and transmission errors when traversing over carrier-based SIP trunks over traditional PSTN lines. And that's where we've seen a lot of users adopt the cloud or a hybrid version of the cloud where you could connect to a provider in the cloud that's just doing your phone service. But one of the nice pieces in this enterprise console, you see Gus is showing us here the Faxcom servers for Data Center East. If you were experiencing issues and you wanted to deliver traffic over the SIP circuit and you kept experiencing failures, you could take a look in the Faxcom server configuration here, and you would be able to monitor those and see if they're spiking or increasing. And you even have the flexibility of directing that traffic that might be going through your SIP trunk and experiencing those failures to route through another Faxcom server. For example, the Data Center East might be using PSTN boards. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility there where you could utilize that integration, but then also if you start experiencing those failures, direct the traffic to a more reliable source or to an alternate source for both sending and receiving.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd like to add, David, is that we have, these particular graphs that I'm showing here are based on transmit and receive, and we have two types of errors called connection and non-connection errors. The connection errors occur after you've done a fax handshake. Non-connections are before the fax handshake, so non-connection would be a busy signal, but also perhaps a voice answer. And we have seen with our customers, this will show you, we're running in the lab environment here, so the errors are very low and not really representative of what the real world would see. You do see a certain amount of errors across the board when you in the real world. With the non-connection errors, you might see around 8 to 10%, and the connection errors, you might see actually the other way around. Connection errors 8 to 10%, and non-connection errors maybe 20%. But they're like I said, the alarming system works with all this. So if you have a certain baseline that you have, you can set the alarm so if it ever climbs above that base level, you know that something might be going wrong. And we have seen cases where, for instance, phone lines have developed, noise, or they become less reliable, and the connection errors will start to climb, and the alarms will be triggered, and then people will go look at it and they say there's something wrong with this phone line. And we've also seen issues where in certain data centers, fax servers are talking to different call managers, and it turns out that certain call managers not functioning properly, and the fax server is talking to that compromised call manager is showing higher error levels. So we have seen cases where some fax servers all of a sudden will start getting twice the level of errors than the others, and the alarm will be triggered, and then within the inspection of those fax servers, they'll say, hey, they're talking to this call manager, something's wrong with that call manager, and the call manager has to be reconfigured or replaced.
And specifically, Gus, with SIP too.
Yes.
With the SIP, we've seen with customers where it'll be inconsistent from different times of the day. So on a SIP circuit, the traffic may be working perfectly fine for the first few hours of the day, but then at lunchtime, the carrier may have changed their call pads and we start seeing an increase. So that's one of the challenges we've seen with utilizing SIP trunks is that at different times of the day or based on how large a fax may be, it could have an impact on the success rate. And in addition to supporting the PSTN boards and going out of traditional trunks, Biscom also has a fully hosted cloud option that they use and a hybrid option called Faxcom Anywhere, where if we're seeing that path is unavailable or say the PRI line is not there, that you could connect to their Faxcom Anywhere cloud service and have those go out via the cloud without using the local telephony. So there's a lot of options there of both being aware of when those errors may be increasing or if they start affecting production and being alerted from the business and IT side, and then also from a resolution side, directing that traffic somewhere else to allow that traffic to begin flowing again as quickly as possible.
All right. Well, So, is there anything else we should add to this, David, or should I just continue on to the audit trail?
Yeah, let's take a look at the audit trail, and then I have some other questions that are coming in that I think will that we can touch on after the audit piece.
Okay. So what I was showing before we talked about the connection errors and stuff was the fact that you can apply policies and different administrators can enforce different settings, and different administrators can actually go and touch some of these components and make changes. So having an audit trail is pretty important because you want to be able to see who made what changes where. And so we do have what we call a history page. And any change that's done, any change that's done in enterprise management that could possibly affect how a system is configured, fax queue or fax server, gets saved in this history page. And there's a lot of different things that can happen, and so we have descriptions of what's happening. We have the name of the object that's being managed, what the action was, where in this case properties were saved, and who the user was. So there is an audit trail that will be here that will show you who did what changes. And I have another system here that's being used internally by some of the support staff. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it'd be easier to show you that there's a lot of, you can actually go and filter by person. So for instance, if I want to see everything that Anne has done, I can do this, and I can see all the changes that she's done recently. Or I can go ahead and change it, see what Daniel's done, etc. So not only is the audit trail there, but there's a filter so you can actually go and see what different people have been doing recently. Or if you wanted to, you could go look at a specific object and see how many people have touched that object. So if there's an object here, there's a console that we have a lot of users making changes on. It's SMTP clone test. So we can go back here in this particular console. We have changes that have happened. I've made a few changes. Fred has made a few changes. Jingtao has made a few changes. So there is an audit trail that we store what the change was. So for instance, if we look at here, items changed, it shows us that all these 3 fax servers were removed from this console. So it gives you an idea of what the change was and who made the change and when it was made. And we also have a way to roll back. So if you wanted to roll back to a prior state, you could do that. You could select an entry and say roll back to that. And the enterprise manager would reset the item being rolled back to the state that it was at that point. And I think, Dave, that's all I was going to say about the audit trail, unless you can think of something I might have missed.
No, it's perfect. It shows exactly what we want to see. If anybody changes anything, you know exactly who did it, when, where, why, and how. So I did have, Gus, another question that came in regarding user management within the system. Can you talk a little bit about that and how different ways you're able to either manage individual users and also maybe with regards to the AD integration?
Right. So I'm assuming we're talking about managing the administrators that can access the system. Is that what we're talking about, or are we talking about?
Well, can we talk about both? Could we talk about both administrators and as well as if an administrator wanted to set up specific user groups?
Yes. Okay. All right. So, well, since we're looking at the enterprise management, I'll start with how do you actually add administrators to the system. In every console, there's the edit console hotspot. And basically, there's a list of administrators that you can add, and then you can add them from Active Directory. And then we have different levels. We have the view alarms only, start-stop services, read-write properties, manage the routes and user table, which is going to be related to the other question, the second half of this question, and full access. So there's 5 different levels of access that can be added. And I can go in through Active Directory and add anybody to be able to actually access this console. As you can see, this Edge Service Account user, which I've been using for my demo on the other system, has full access, and nobody else does. And this is actually can be very, very useful because what we've noticed with enterprises is that they're trying to limit the amount of remote desktop access administrators have to systems that handle services. So with that, the fact that this is a web browser, and this web browser is running a service as using an account that already has access to all the fax-related systems, you can add an administrator to manage a console here and not have to go and add them to, go and add that user direct access to all the systems involved in the management of these systems. So for instance, all these queues are running on a computer. I added Edge Service Account access to this console. he can instantly launch this web browser and start doing his management, but I did not have to give him access to these systems directly. I didn't have to give him access to remote desktop to that system, or to be able to start and stop services in that system, or read and write files. So the way to delegate management is greatly simplified through this browser enterprise management. I can create a console that only has the systems that I want somebody to manage, and then I could just easily add them to the list of managers in this console, send them an email with a URL link, and that person can go right in and start managing without me having to give them access to a whole bunch of other systems and a whole bunch of other capabilities like remote desktop access and stuff like that. And there's a page in the enterprise management here that gives you an idea of all the administrators that have been added to every console. So these are all the administrators right now, and by expanding, you can see what systems that person is able to manage. Okay. And that's, I think that covers adding administrators and managing administrators in enterprise management. And was that sound clear enough, David? Should I move on now to managing users to send faxes?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so I'm going to go in here, and so now I'm going to run this as I'm going to be logged into this user who only has access to one console. But now this administrator, can now add and remove users from one of these queues. And the way we do that with Active Directory is through policies mostly. You can add policies to a queue that specify which users can send faxes through that queue. And I'm really not sure what the policies are right now, but let's go take a look. Actually, over here, this one. All right, so you can basically add a policy that can open up a whole area of Active Directory or a group of users in Active Directory. In this particular case, there's a policy that says anybody contained by this OU in Active Directory can now send faxes to this queue. So one way of doing this is through policies. And then policies assume Active Directory identities. So the policies are linked to AD. You can have a group in AD, and then you can say, create a policy based on that group. Say anybody who's a member of this group can send faxes to this queue. And if there's a web client, I don't have a web client demo, the web fax client, but if there's a web fax client associated with the queue, they'll be able to log into that web fax client immediately, just because they were part of the policy. So that's one way of doing it. And the other way is that we also have a routes and user list. If you wanted to directly add users or directly add routes to different locations, you could do it through the routes and user list, where you would add entries and then route to those entries. It could be UNC folders, they could be printers, they could be FTP sites, SharePoint sites, and you could also add Active Directory users in this list as well. So there's two ways of doing it: one by adding users directly, or one by creating a policy that links to an Active Directory object.
Perfect. Can you open a user account?
I don't have, you mean as far as like a Faxcom client user account? I wasn't prepared for a demo for the Faxcom client itself.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Nope, we can set up a separate session and go through that. There was another question here that I think would be applicable back to the audit trail. We had a question about where that was written to and if it could be exported. Okay. And if you all support Splunk.
All right, so the enterprise fax management works off a SQL database. So everything is through that SQL database. All the configuration is stored in the SQL database. So and all the dashboard data, all the graphs and all the history. So yeah, it's all in SQL. And there's table definitions associated with that. And we can make those definitions available if somebody was interested in diving into the SQL directly and trying to pull out some of those tables. Is there any other questions, David? Or
yeah, I guess I had another one that came in where they were asking just if they wanted to assign an inbound DID to a user. Could you explain how that's done? I think you could do it through Active Directory as one way, or
yeah,
probably the easiest way of managing it.
Okay, let's go back into, so that routes and user table that I showed earlier. So let me go into one of these consoles. Let's try this one. All right. you can do it through Active Directory. So we do have Active Directory integration. So typically for like a mail application where you may be opening up fax to a great deal of users in your enterprise, let's say thousands, a lot of times the preferred method is to just integrate with Active Directory, and we can actually use the facsimile telephone number field or the other facsimile telephone number field directly, and we can search based on Active Directory to route to a user. Another way of doing it is that the queues themselves, which were the pieces that we talked about that handle the integration with an environment, they can actually also have the route and users table. So in here, if I go into the routes and users list, you can add entries in here. So you could add an Active Directory user here, or you could add some other resource or device that you want to route to and give it a telephone number. So there's two ways of doing that routing.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think, too, there's some other, for the audience, there's some other modules and capabilities here that we haven't touched on in today's webinar that accompany the Biscom platform with regards to their advanced fax routing capabilities, as well as workflow and doc flow that they have built in to the system. But today's focus primarily was looking at this centralized console interface where we can control the different groups and then have the alarms and visibility set up. And one of the pieces with this, too, as Gus mentioned early on, we've seen customers where they'll customize these views so that you can give access to your users or the management of different departments where they could see just what their traffic is doing. So if you created a dedicated queue, I know we had some questions about the user creation, but a lot of times we'll have specific integrations or specific departments and groups set up within their own queue. And then that way you can base the queue reporting and alerting and the job tracking piece where we were talking about having customized reports that go out on a daily, weekly basis. You could do that specifically within that group and then give those users specific access to what's going on with just their traffic, but not having to have them have view or access to the rest of the environment. So it's also very powerful for having a specific or individual department just see what's going on with their individual faxing.
Yeah, and with the policies, you can lock certain aspects of that configuration. So if you were to allow them to go in there and reconfigure the system a certain amount, you can lock aspects of that configuration that you knew you didn't want them to change.
So for example, Gus, I think what you're saying there, you could have them, the manager could have the ability to customize the cover sheets in one department or group, but then in another you would be able to lock that down and they would not have the ability to make those changes.
Right. And also what I was trying to show was that they would have the ability to change maybe the TSI or the header that shows up in their fax, the cover page that they use, but they wouldn't be able to change how their queue is communicating to the fax server banks that the enterprise had, because that's something that was probably more strategic based on the full rollout of the application. So there's certain aspects you wouldn't want them to change, but certain aspects you do want them to change, and it's very flexible where you draw those lines.
Gotcha. And I had another question that came in, Gus. Maybe you can take this one. They were asking about exporting faxes and if it's possible to export faxes to a network share as well as exporting the metadata. And I know just a quick answer to that before I let you kind of take on is I know within the Biscom platform, we actually have the ability of having faxes saved to different locations based on the queue or users. So for example, if you wanted to have faxes for a heavily regulated or a highly compliant division go to one type of storage, you do have the ability within the Biscom platform to have their faxes stored in a different location or area than another. But Gus, can you just talk a little bit about exporting faxes in general and their metadata and if there's any limitations there?
No, they shouldn't. We have tools. A lot of that might be built into the client as well, but we definitely have tools that allow you to export faxes with metadata. That's a typical standard tool. And that would be something more along the client side. The client which is using, consuming the fax data that's coming through the system.
Excellent. And then also we had a couple questions about PCI compliance and encryption. I don't know, Gus, if you have too much to share on that piece, but I know that we do use Biscom in a lot of very large financial services as well as credit processors. So I know that we have the ability to encrypt the faxes fully when they're at rest. Is there a way to decrypt those on demand was one of the questions that was asked, and how they were encrypted.
That's a good question. That's not an area that I've been directly involved in, so I don't know the exact answer. I do know that we have encryption features built into the product for storage. But to be honest with you, David, I don't know the answer to that myself personally.
Nope. That's okay. We will get more information back to the individual that asked that question after the webinar. Excellent. Well, I think that brings us to the top of the hour. So, Gus, I appreciate you taking time to walk us through the console and answering all the questions as we went through this. At this time, I would like to go ahead and conclude the webinar. If you all have any additional questions, please feel free to submit them over to us, and we will be responding to the folks that submitted questions here that we didn't have the answers for today, and make sure that you get all the answers that you need. So thank you very much for everyone's time, and we will conclude the webinar at this time.